seated. Good to be with you all this Sunday as usual. I wanted to take a minute and talk about another mystery. This is Trinity Sunday. The Trinity is a mystery. It's hard to explain the Trinity. It's one of those things that's just kind of above our pay grade, so to speak, or at least above my pay grade, to understand the Trinity. And so some people, we kind of have this rite of passage in the church that we make the youngest priest, the junior priest, preach on Trinity Sunday and have them try to explain the Trinity. But Mother Kendra is smartened up, and she took a vacation this Sunday, so she knew what was coming. So I want to take on another mystery this week. It's the mystery of suffering, which is another one of those things that is hard to wrap our heads around as we all experience it. And Paul has this line in our reading from Romans today, our second reading from Romans 5, where he says, and not only that, but we also boast in our sufferings. Right? He's talking about how we boast in his hope of sharing in God's glory, but not only that, that's not the only thing I boast of. I boast in my sufferings, Paul says. And that's a pretty big statement and a hard one for us to wrap our heads around. So what I want to do is talk about that. How does Paul boast in his suffering? So the first thing I want to do is get us a little bit in Paul's mind, if we could, just what his world was. So Paul's world was different than ours in a lot of ways. There were some things that were the same. People are people, right? People are people. That hasn't changed. But the world Paul lived in is different than ours in the sense that, as Americans, we always feel we have an ability to change things. And that's not a bad thing. This is no criticism. This is just a difference between when Paul lived and now. It's part of the country we live in and the freedoms we have. We always have a feeling that we could change things. Paul lived in an empire, the biggest in the world up to that point, the Roman Empire, and there was an emperor, right? And the emperor, the whims of the emperor could affect millions of people. Millions of people. There were a very small group of people who could make decisions that would, for better or for worse, impact millions of people's lives. We see a similar situation going on right now in Russia, right? We have the sense that the war in Ukraine is not the will of the Russian people, right? But a very, very small group of people in leadership making those decisions and affecting the lives of not only everyone in Ukraine, but everyone in Russia and the economy, right, of the whole world. A small group of people, decisions affecting everyone. That's kind of the world Paul just was used to. So there were things when he talks about suffering, the first thing he means is, hardships. Just the burdens we all have to bear that we don't really get a choice about. We can make an argument, gas prices are a hardship, right? It's certainly a minor one compared to some of the hardships that other people have to live with, the physical suffering and in certain countries. But gas prices can be, it's a thing that we all hate, but none of us can do anything to change, right? None of us like it. I'm sure if we took a congregational poll right now, said how many of you are in favor of gas prices, we would get 0% in favor of our high gas prices. But also 0% can affect change. It's one of those things we got to live with. In Paul's world, there were lots of things like that he had to live with. Lots of hardships that were just the nature of living in an empire where a small sliver of people make decisions that affect millions upon millions upon millions. So when he talks about sufferings, the first thing he talks about is hardships. The second thing he's talking about is kind of personal adversity or hardships, right, that we all deal with. And he certainly was not exempt from that. Paul, in another letter, writes to the Corinthians about what he calls the thorn in his side or the thorn in his flesh, which is this condition he has. It's a health condition. He never really spells it out, but it's a health condition he has that kind of hinders his ability to do the work of the gospel. In Paul's mind, I don't have the energy, the health, the ability to preach the gospel like I know I could if I were just 100%. So he prays that God would take this condition from him that he could be 100%. And God tells him no. He said, my power is made perfect in your weakness, not in your strength. So that serves a purpose. So Paul's speaking about not only the hardships that we all just carry as kind of that come with life, but kind of personal hardships as well. Now, what Paul isn't trying to do is kind of give a formula to explain all human suffering. Right? The Bible doesn't do that. It doesn't. What he is trying to do is give a reflection on how he's come to see how he can boast in his suffering, the merit of suffering if he puts it in the hands of God. I know that's a hard thing to hear. We don't think of suffering as having merit, but Paul's trying to explain, I'm going to boast in my suffering because I can see how they can have merit if it's in the hands of God. So this is what Paul says. He said, I'm going to boast in my suffering because my suffering produces endurance. My suffering forces me to seek God for strength that I didn't know I had. Maybe I didn't have when this started. My suffering forces me to maybe seek strength from others in a way that builds me up, but also to turn to God for strength that I didn't have. It's creating an endurance in me that I didn't have before. So my hardships are creating an endurance, and that endurance is building character. And when Paul talks about character, he's not talking about just like, when we play a team sport so we can learn character, like lessons. He's not talking about that. Paul's talking about character as like a tried and tested faith, a Christian character that's tried and tested, that has deep roots, that has a depth to it, that's not superficial, that's not lip service, but that has a depth to it that's survived. Like we have trees here that survive hurricanes, they survived our freeze, right? Those are mature trees that have a depth to their roots. They're not new trees. They're not flimsy trees. They're trees that have depth and roots. And Paul's saying, the endurance that this causes me to have is creating roots and depths in my faith and character. And that is leading me to hope. It's pushing me to hope. The more my faith and character grows roots and depth, it pushes me to hope. Not only to hope in Jesus as the one who can heal me here, but in hope in Jesus as the one who ultimately heals us in totality in his kingdom, right? The aches and pains of this world, the suffering of this world, the hardships, the adversity, the trials that we all face, not only forces me to hope in him, but it also moves my eyes to look for his kingdom instead of getting too comfortable in this one. And so Paul's saying, for all those reasons and more, I will boast in my sufferings, because Paul sees this value. And this is one that's hard for us to hear sometimes. The trials, the hardships, the adversities of life create in us and form and shape in us things that we can't get any other way. Right? There's no book we can read that will help shape them. There's no podcast we can listen to. There's no test we can take. Right? The hardships, the adversities, the trials, the hurdles we have to overcome shape and create in us things that can't be formed any other way. A depth of faith and character that can't just be manufactured any other way. So if we think about, the greatest generation, the generation that many of us had loved ones a part of that is mostly gone. There's a few still left. But that greatest generation of people that lived through 2 world wars and a depression in their formative years, and what that type of hardship and adversity meant for them as they grew to raise families and be in communities, how those things shaped them to be a resilient people. Right? Nothing else could have done that. They couldn't have taken a class to be shaped that way. It was just life and adversity. I was thinking of a person Sarah and I knew back in Wyoming who's since passed. His name was Jack Sorvik. And Jack Sorvik had what I call the ministry of buttons. Remember Jack Sorvik always had the buttons? Jack Sorvik was a polio survivor, and he came to church every Sunday with his crutches. He had the full crutches that kind of went up his arm where he held on, and his legs were not strong at all, and he would kind of take some time to get up the aisle with his crutches, but he always wore buttons that would say something like, "Rejoice, this is the Lord's day," or "I will give thanks to the Lord, for he is wonderful." Things like that. There were always these super positive buttons, and that was his personality. So if Jack was greeting someone at the door, Jack would smile and try to give them a hug and shake their hand and tell a joke, always laugh with people. And he said, "This is my ministry. God has blessed me in so many ways," and he would say this with his crutches and that, "to see life differently. So if I can inspire someone else to see life differently, to know that they're more than their adversities, that they don't define them, that our hardships don't define us, but that even through them, we can see the goodness of God. If I can do that for one person, I want to do that." So he was one of our most gracious kind of ushers and in a previous church. And he passed away a few years back. But everyone had a Jack story of just his warmth and his encouragement, because he wanted to pass on to people the goodness of God. And he thought, if I can proclaim the goodness of God to someone, they might hear it in a different way. He had a faith and a heart that was formed through his suffering, and a depth to his faith that very few of us achieve, quite honestly. He would boast in his suffering because of what they produced. It's a hard thing to say, and it's a hard thing to accept, but the hardships and trials in our lives, when we put them in the hand of God, can serve a purpose to form in us a more Christ-like character. That's the first thing. And then the second thing that they can do is give us a holy and full hope. Right? The aches and pains, the trials, the hardships, move our eyes from here, the here and now, to there. Whether there be trusting in the Lord for a better today, or for looking to him for a better tomorrow. And so Paul would say, for those two things, I'll boast in my suffering. Because God is working in me to shape me in a way that I couldn't be shaped any other way to be more like him. And because he's giving me a full and holy hope in something better than there is. So I would encourage you, if you're in a season where you're facing hardship, adversity, personal suffering, challenges in your life and your family, to turn those over, offer those up to the hands of God. I cannot say it will make them easier. This isn't a every cloud has a silver lining type of sermon. This isn't a it'll all be easier to bear. I know it's hard and heavy at times. But in his hands, they can become something different. They can shape in us a more Christ-like character that we couldn't shape through any other way, or they can give us a full and holy hope in him and him alone. So I would encourage you, in our best moments, maybe we could lift those sufferings up to him. Offer them up to him, that he might shape in us something and be filled with hope in him, for not only for today, but for tomorrow as well. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.